They came from the void, a shadow that swallowed stars and left only silence in its wake. The DeathWorlders, apex predators forged in the crucible of a planet that defied every natural law, descended upon us like an unstoppable plague. Their homeworld, a place of perpetual torment, was a living nightmare. Gravity there crushed with the weight of a god's wrath. Storms raged with the fury of titans, and every living organism was a predator honed to perfection by millennia of brutal evolution. The DeathWorlders were not merely survivors of this hellish place. They were its masters, its ultimate creation. And now, they had turned their gaze toward Earth. We were not prepared. How could we be? Their ships darkened our skies, massive and unyielding, their hulls bristling with alien weaponry that turned our defenses into ash. Our missiles and railguns might as well have been stones thrown against a hurricane. When their soldiers landed, the true horror began. They weren't just soldiers. They were monsters, towering beasts wrapped in chitinous armor that no bullet seemed to pierce. They moved with an unnatural grace for creatures so massive, their claws slicing through steel and flesh alike as if both were paper. Cities fell in days. Continents collapsed in weeks. Humanity's armies fought valiantly, but valor meant nothing against an enemy that could shrug off tank shells and tear through battalions like a scythe through wheat. Hope dwindled with every passing hour. Entire nations vanished under their relentless advance, their people slaughtered or dragged away to some unknown fate. The DeathWorlders didn't negotiate. They didn't communicate. They simply consumed, leaving nothing but ruins and corpses in their wake. And yet, amidst the ashes of our world, one man refused to kneel. Sergeant Cain. I'd heard his name whispered in the bunkers and trenches where humanity's remnants huddled together like rats in the dark. His story was passed around like a talisman against despair. A soldier who had defied the impossible and lived to tell the tale. He wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. There were no medals pinned to his chest or grand speeches attributed to him. He was just a man, a soldier who had seen too much war and carried too many scars. But when the DeathWorlders came, Cain didn't break like so many others did. He fought. The first time I saw him was in the ruins of New Berlin. The city had been transformed into a hunting ground, a labyrinth of shattered buildings where the DeathWorlders stalked survivors for sport. I was part of a ragged platoon tasked with evacuating civilians from what used to be the subway system. It was a suicide mission. We all knew it. The DeathWorlders had us pinned down on all sides, their guttural roars echoing through the tunnels as they closed in for the kill. Our ammunition was nearly gone, our morale even lower. Then he appeared. Cain emerged from the shadows like something out of legend, his battered combat armor smeared with alien blood and soot. His rifle barked once, twice, 3 times, each shot finding its mark with unerring precision. A DeathWorlder lunged at him, a hulking beast with serrated limbs and eyes that burned like embers. But Cain sidestepped it with an ease that seemed almost preternatural. His knife flashed silver in the dim light, and before I could even process what had happened, the creature collapsed at his feet in a heap of twitching limbs. "Get up," he growled at us, his voice rough as gravel, but steady as bedrock. "You're not dead yet." There was something about him, something unshakable, that made you believe survival was still possible even when everything screamed otherwise. We followed him without question as he led us out of that hellhole, cutting down DeathWorlders with ruthless efficiency along the way. By the time we reached safety, we weren't just alive, we were ready to fight again. But for Cain, survival wasn't enough. While humanity scrambled to hold onto whatever scraps of civilization remained, hiding in bunkers or fleeing into space, Cain went on the offensive. Alone. No backup, no reinforcements, just him and his rifle against an enemy that had crushed entire fleets without breaking stride. He became a ghost in their ranks, striking from the shadows and vanishing before they could retaliate. Supply depots erupted into fireballs visible from orbit. Command centers were reduced to rubble. Entire battalions disappeared without explanation. The DeathWorlders began to fear him, or at least as close to fear as creatures like them could feel. They called him the Wraith, an unkillable specter that haunted their every step. For the first time in their long history of conquest, they hesitated. I don't know how he did it, how one man could fight an entire war on his own, but Cain wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for us, for humanity's right to exist in a galaxy that wanted us extinct. Word of his exploits spread quickly among the survivors. If Cain could stand against them, so could we. His defiance became our rallying cry. His victories became our hope. Resistance cells sprang up across what remained of Earth's surface, inspired by his example. We learned to fight smarter, not harder, using guerrilla tactics to exploit even the smallest weaknesses in our enemy's armor. But Cain wasn't satisfied with just turning the tide. He wanted to end it. When rumors began circulating that he planned to infiltrate one of their Hive ships, the nerve center of their invasion force, we thought it was madness. No one had ever set foot on one of those colossal monstrosities and lived to tell about it. But Cain didn't care about odds or statistics. He cared about results. "I'm not coming back," he told me before he left, his eyes hard as steel, but burning with something deeper, something almost primal. "But if I can take out their hive mind, maybe we got a chance." And then he was gone. What happened next is where history turns into legend. The sky above us churned with the blackened clouds of war, streaked with the fiery trails of descending DeathWorlder dropships. Their engines screamed like banshees as they tore through the atmosphere, their hulls glowing red-hot from re-entry. The ground beneath our feet trembled with their approach, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with the guttural, alien roars of their soldiers. It wasn't just an attack. It was an avalanche, an unstoppable tide of death and destruction bearing down on what little remained of humanity's resistance. We were dug in at what used to be the outskirts of Paris, a city now reduced to rubble and ash. The resistance had chosen this place not because it was defensible, but because it was symbolic. If we could hold this ground, even for a day, it would send a message. Humanity wasn't finished yet. But as the DeathWorlders closed in, their monstrous forms silhouetted against the burning horizon, that hope began to feel like a cruel joke. I stood among a ragged line of fighters, clutching my rifle with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Around me were men and women who had seen too much death and carried too little hope. Our weapons were scavenged, our ammo scarce, and our defenses laughable against an enemy that had turned entire continents into graveyards. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and outmatched in every conceivable way. And yet there he was. Sergeant Cain stood at the center of our line, like an immovable pillar amidst a storm. His battered armor bore the scars of countless battles, jagged claw marks and scorch burns that told stories of survival against impossible odds. His rifle rested across his chest, its barrel blackened from use, but meticulously maintained. He didn't flinch as the DeathWorlders advanced. He didn't even blink. Instead, he turned to face us, his voice cutting through the rising din like a blade. "Listen up," he barked, his tone sharp enough to snap us out of our collective despair. "They think we're broken. They think we're weak. They think they can walk over us like they've done to every other species in this galaxy." He paused, letting his words sink in as he scanned our faces with those piercing eyes of his. Eyes that seemed to see straight through you and into whatever strength you had left. "They're wrong," he continued, his voice rising with a ferocity that sent shivers down my spine. "We're not broken. We're pissed off. And today, we show them what happens when you back humanity into a corner." A cheer rose from the line, not loud or confident, but defiant. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Cain turned back toward the advancing horde and raised his rifle. "Hold your fire until I give the word," he ordered. "Let them come closer." The DeathWorlders surged forward like a living wave of nightmares, towering beasts with chitinous armor that glinted in the firelight, their claws carving deep furrows into the earth as they charged. They moved with terrifying speed for creatures so massive, their guttural roars echoing across the battlefield like thunder. "Steady," Cain muttered, his voice calm despite the chaos bearing down on us. The first line of DeathWorlders crossed into range, hulking brutes with serrated limbs and glowing eyes that burned with predatory hunger. "Now!" Cain roared. The battlefield erupted in a cacophony of gunfire and explosions as we unleashed everything we had. Bullets ricocheted off their armored hides while grenades sent up plumes of dirt and alien ichor. But for every DeathWorlder that fell, 3 more took its place. Cain didn't falter. He moved along the line like a man possessed, shouting orders and firing precise bursts from his rifle. When one of their larger brutes broke through our defenses, a towering monstrosity with jaws that could crush steel, Cain met it head-on. He dodged its initial swipe with uncanny agility before planting a grenade under its chin and diving clear just as it detonated. The creature collapsed in a heap of smoldering flesh, but Cain was already moving on to his next target. "Focus fire on their legs," he shouted over the din. "Bring them down where they stand." We followed his lead, aiming for joints and weak points instead of trying to punch through their armor. It worked. Slowly but surely we began to stem the tide. But then came a second wave. Dropships rained down from above like meteors, disgorging fresh troops directly onto our position. These weren't just soldiers. They were hunters bred for war. Leaner, faster versions of their brutish counterparts with razor-sharp claws and an almost insect-like precision in their movements. "Fall back!" someone shouted from further down the line. "No!" Cain bellowed, his voice cutting through the panic like a whip crack. "Hold your ground. If they break us here, it's over." He didn't wait for us to respond before charging straight into the thick of it, a lone figure against an army of nightmares. His rifle barked in rapid succession as he tore through their ranks with ruthless efficiency. When his ammo ran dry, he switched to his knife, a wicked blade that gleamed in the firelight as he carved a path through flesh and chitin alike. It was madness, suicidal even, but somehow it worked. Cain's defiance lit something inside us, a spark that turned fear into fury and despair into determination. We fought harder than we ever thought possible, holding our ground against an enemy that should have crushed us without effort. But even Cain couldn't be everywhere at once. The DeathWorlders began to encircle us, their hunters moving with surgical precision to cut off our escape routes, while their brutes hammered at our front lines. "Cain's!" I shouted over the chaos as I reloaded my rifle with trembling hands. "We're getting overrun." He didn't answer, not with words anyway. Instead, he pulled something from his belt, a small device I recognized immediately, a beacon transmitter rigged to detonate on activation. "Get ready," he growled under his breath before slamming it into the ground at his feet. And then everything changed. The sky above us lit up as orbital strikes rained down on the DeathWorlders' rear lines. Massive beams of energy that turned night into day and vaporized everything in their path. Cain had called for reinforcements, not soldiers or ships, but firepower enough to turn this battlefield into hell itself. The battlefield was chaos incarnate, a swirling storm of fire, blood, and death. The orbital strikes Cain had called down had ripped through the DeathWorlders' ranks, carving great swathes of destruction into their forces. The ground trembled beneath our feet as the blast tore apart their rear lines, sending shockwaves that knocked even their massive brutes off balance. It bought us precious time. Time to regroup, to reload, to breathe. But Cain didn't stop. He didn't even slow down. While the rest of us scrambled to hold the line and push back what remained of the enemy, Cain's eyes were fixed on the horizon, or rather, on the monolithic shape that loomed above it. The Hive ship. It hung in the sky like a black sun, its massive bulk blotting out the stars. This was no ordinary ship. It was a fortress, a city, a living machine that pulsed with alien energy. It was the nerve center of their invasion force, the heart of the swarm that had brought humanity to its knees. And Cain was going to kill it. I saw him standing there amidst the carnage, his armor scorched and battered, but his resolve unbroken. His rifle hung at his side, its barrel still smoking from constant use. Blood, both human and alien, streaked his face and hands, but his eyes burned with a fire that no amount of exhaustion could extinguish. He turned to me then, as if sensing my gaze. "Hold them here," he said simply. "Wait, what?" I stammered, barely able to process his words over the ringing in my ears and the pounding of my heart. "Cain, you can't. I can, he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. And I will. He started toward the Hive ship without another word, moving with the same grim determination that had carried him through every impossible battle we'd fought together. I wanted to stop him, to grab his arm and tell him he was insane, but something in his expression froze me in place. It wasn't just resolve I saw in those eyes. It was purpose. Cain wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for something bigger than himself, bigger than all of us. And deep down, I knew there was no stopping him. The journey to the Hive ship was a gauntlet of death and destruction. The DeathWorlders weren't going to let anyone get close without a fight, not even Cain. Waves of their soldiers poured out from every direction, their guttural roars echoing across the battlefield as they converged on him like wolves scenting blood. But Cain didn't falter. He moved through their ranks like a force of nature, unstoppable and unrelenting. His rifle barked with deadly precision as he picked off targets one by one, each shot finding its mark with unerring accuracy. When his magazine ran dry, he switched to his knife, a blade honed to razor sharpness that flashed in the firelight as he carved through flesh and chitin alike. When even that wasn't enough, he used his fists, his boots, anything he could turn into a weapon. The DeathWorlders fought with all the ferocity their nightmare world had bred into them. But they weren't prepared for someone like Cain. He wasn't just strong or fast or skilled. He was relentless. No matter how many times they knocked him down or how many wounds they inflicted, he kept getting back up. And every time he rose, he took more of them with him. By the time he reached the base of the Hive ship's landing struts, a massive structure that towered above him like some ancient monolith, he was drenched in blood and barely standing. But he didn't stop. He climbed. The struts were slick with alien ichor and scorching hot from residual energy discharges, but Cain scaled them with a single-minded determination that defied logic or reason. Above him loomed an access hatch, a small opening barely visible against the vast expanse of black metal that made up the Hive ship's hull. When he finally reached it, he didn't hesitate. He planted an explosive charge against its surface and detonated it without waiting for cover or safety. The blast ripped through the hatch with a deafening roar, sending shards of metal flying in every direction. Cain shielded his face with one arm as he climbed through the jagged opening and into the belly of the beast. Inside, the Hive ship was a nightmare made flesh. The walls pulsed with an organic rhythm that seemed almost alive, glowing faintly with an eerie green light that cast long shadows across every surface. The air was thick with humidity and an acrid stench that burned Cain's throat with every breath. Alien machinery hummed and clicked all around him, massive constructs whose purpose he couldn't begin to guess at, but which radiated power like miniature suns. And then there were them. The DeathWorlders inside were different from those on the battlefield, larger, faster, smarter. These weren't just soldiers. They were guardians of their hive mind itself, the ultimate predator's bred, not just for war, but for annihilation. Cain didn't care. They came at him in waves, claws flashing and teeth bared, but he met them head-on without hesitation. His rifle spat fire as he cut down one after another in rapid succession. When they got too close for comfort, which they always did, he switched to hand-to-hand combat, brutal punches and savage knife strikes that left trails of alien blood splattered across walls and floors alike. But even Cain couldn't keep this up forever. His movements grew slower with each passing moment as exhaustion began to take its toll on his battered body. Wounds he hadn't even noticed before now screamed for attention as blood seeped from countless cuts and gashes across his arms and torso. Still he pressed on, because somewhere deep within this hellish labyrinth lay his true target, the hive mind itself, the central intelligence coordinating every DeathWorlder across Earth's surface. The Hive ship's corridors stretched endlessly before him, a maze of pulsating walls and alien machinery that seemed to hum with malevolent intent. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burnt flesh and the coppery tang of blood, human and alien alike. Cain's breath came in ragged gasps, each one a struggle against the searing pain in his ribs. His armor was barely holding together, its once imposing plates now cracked and scorched, hanging loose in places where claws had torn through. His knife was chipped, his rifle nearly out of ammo, but his resolve burned brighter than ever. He had carved a path of destruction through the Hive ship's defenders, leaving behind a trail of shattered bodies and broken machinery. The DeathWorlders had thrown everything they had at him, wave after wave of their monstrous soldiers. But Cain had endured. He wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting to end this, to make sure no more humans would have to face the horrors he'd seen. This was no longer about him. It never had been. But now, as he entered the heart of the Hive ship, he knew the real battle was only beginning. The chamber before him was massive, its ceiling lost in darkness high above. Strange organic structures jutted from the walls like grotesque sculptures, glowing faintly with that sickly green light that seemed to permeate everything on this cursed ship. In the center of the room stood a massive construct, a pulsating mass of alien technology and organic matter that radiated power so intense it made Cain's skin crawl. This was it. The hive mind. It wasn't just a machine. It was alive. Tendrils of bioluminescent energy snaked out from its core, connecting to the walls, the floor, even the air itself. It pulsed with an almost hypnotic rhythm, each beat sending ripples through the chamber like the heartbeat of some ancient god. And standing between Cain and his target were 5 figures. They were unlike any DeathWorlders he'd faced before. Larger, faster, deadlier. These weren't just soldiers or hunters. They were champions, the apex predators of a species already bred for perfection. Their armor gleamed like obsidian in the dim light, each plate etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and writhe as they moved. Their claws were longer than swords, their eyes glowing with an intelligence far beyond that of their lesser kin. Cain tightened his grip on his rifle. His instincts screamed at him to retreat, to find another way, but he silenced them. There was no turning back now. The first one charged without warning, moving with a speed that defied its massive size. Cain barely had time to react as it lunged at him, its claws slicing through the air where his head had been moments before. He ducked low and fired a burst into its exposed flank, but the bullets ricocheted harmlessly off its armor. Figures, he muttered under his breath as he rolled out of the way of another swipe. The second and third warriors joined the fray, flanking him with terrifying precision. One swung a massive bladed limb toward his midsection while the other aimed for his legs. Cain dropped flat to the ground at the last second, letting their attacks pass over him before springing back to his feet and firing point-blank into one of their faces. The creature reeled back with a guttural roar as sparks erupted from its damaged helmet. But there were still 2 more. The 4th warrior hung back, observing with cold detachment while its comrades attacked in unison. The 5th, well, it didn't move at all. Not yet. It simply stood there beside the hive mind's core like some dark sentinel, its presence radiating an aura of menace so palpable it made Cain's skin crawl. He couldn't win this, not conventionally anyway. Cain's mind raced as he dodged another flurry of attacks, his body moving on instinct even as his thoughts churned through every possibility. His rifle was useless against their armor. His knife wouldn't do much better. He needed something stronger, something bigger. And then he saw it, one of their weapons. It lay discarded on the ground near one of their fallen comrades. A strange device that looked like a cross between a cannon and a living organism. Its surface pulsed faintly with energy, and tendrils extended from its base like roots seeking purchase in the ground. Cain didn't hesitate. He dove for the weapon just as one of the warriors lunged at him again. Its claws grazed his shoulder as he rolled across the floor and grabbed hold of the alien device. It felt cold and alive in his hands, its surface writhing beneath his fingers as if trying to resist him. Not today. Cain growled through gritted teeth as he aimed it at his attackers. The weapon roared to life with a sound that sent shivers down his spine, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through every bone in his body. A beam of searing green energy erupted from its barrel, striking one of the charging warriors square in the chest. Its armor held for a moment, then cracked, then shattered as the beam burned straight through it and out the other side. The creature collapsed in a heap, its lifeless body smoking from within. Cain didn't stop there. He swung the weapon toward another warrior and fired again, this time aiming for its legs. The beam sliced clean through them like a hot knife through butter, sending the creature toppling to the ground with an ear-splitting shriek. The remaining three hesitated, not out of fear. Cain doubted they even felt fear, but out of caution. They circled him now instead of charging outright, their movements calculated and precise. But Cain wasn't giving them time to think. He fired again and again, each shot tearing through armor and flesh alike until only two remained. The fourth champion, the tactician, and that dark sentinel by the Hive mind's core. The tactician lunged at him with blinding speed, but Cain was ready this time. He sidestepped its attack and slammed the alien weapon into its side like a club before firing point-blank into its torso. The blast sent it flying across the chamber where it slammed into one of those grotesque organic structures with enough force to shatter bone and chitin alike. Now there was only one left, the sentinel. It stepped forward slowly now, not rushing like its brethren, but advancing with deliberate menace. Its claws glowed faintly, with some kind of energy field that crackled ominously in time with each step it took toward him. Cain gritted his teeth against exhaustion as he raised his stolen weapon one last time. The sentinel loomed before him, the last and greatest of the Hive ship's defenders. It was massive, even by DeathWorlders standards, its obsidian armor etched with glowing runes that pulsed with an unnatural rhythm. Its claws crackled with energy, each step it took sending vibrations through the floor as if the ship itself feared its presence. This was no mere warrior. It was a living weapon, a being bred for one purpose: to destroy anything that dared challenge the Hive mind. Cain stood his ground, the alien weapon clutched tightly in his hands. His body screamed in protest, his muscles burned, his wounds bled freely, and his vision blurred at the edges, but he refused to fall. Not now, not when he was so close. He could feel the Hive mind's presence behind the sentinel, a pulsing mass of alien thought and malice that radiated hatred for all things human. It was watching him, he realized, calculating, analyzing, waiting to see if its champion would finish him off. Not today, Cain muttered under his breath. The sentinel moved first, lunging forward with terrifying speed for something so massive. Its claws slashed through the air in a blur of energy and death, but Cain was already moving. He dove to the side, rolling across the floor as the claws carved deep gouges into the metal where he'd been standing moments before. He came up on one knee and fired the alien weapon, its beam of green energy lancing toward the sentinel's chest. The sentinel raised an arm to block the shot, and for a moment it seemed like it might work. But then its armor cracked under the force of the blast. The creature staggered back with a guttural roar that shook the chamber. Cain didn't let up. He fired again and again, each shot aimed at the same spot on its chest. The sentinel's armor began to buckle under the relentless assault, glowing cracks spreading across its surface like fractures in glass. But it wasn't going down without a fight. It charged again, faster this time, its claws slashing in wide arcs that forced Cain to retreat step by step. He could feel his strength waning with every movement. His breaths came in ragged gasps, and his arms felt like lead as he struggled to keep the weapon steady. The sentinel was relentless, pressing him harder and harder until his back hit one of the pulsating walls of the chamber. There was nowhere left to run. The sentinel raised both claws high above its head, preparing to deliver a killing blow. But Cain wasn't done yet. With a roar of defiance that echoed through the chamber, he dropped low and rolled beneath its attack, coming up behind it just as its claws slammed into the wall where he'd been standing. The impact sent shockwaves through the chamber and left the creature momentarily off balance. It was all Cain needed. He aimed for the cracks in its armor, the weak point he'd created, and pulled the trigger one last time. The alien weapon roared to life with a sound that seemed to shake the very air around him as a beam of searing energy tore through the sentinel's chest. Its roar turned into a gurgling screech as it stumbled forward, collapsing onto its knees before finally crashing to the ground in a lifeless heap. Cain didn't even have time to catch his breath before turning toward his true target, the Hive mind. The core pulsed faster now, its tendrils writhing like living things as if in panic. It knew what was coming. Cain approached it slowly, each step sending fresh waves of pain through his battered body. He could feel its presence pressing against his mind, a cold, alien intelligence that tried to worm its way into his thoughts. But Cain wasn't afraid. You wanted humanity gone. He growled through gritted teeth as he planted one last explosive charge at the base of the Hive mind's core. Well, you should have picked an easier fight. He activated the timer and turned away without looking back. The Hive mind's tendrils lashed out at him in desperation, but they were too late. Cain sprinted toward the jagged hole he'd blasted into the ship earlier. The same hole he'd climbed through to get inside, and threw himself out into open air just as the charge detonated. The explosion lit up the night sky like a second sun, tearing through the Hive ship from within and sending massive chunks of debris raining down onto the battlefield below. The shockwave hit Cain midair, throwing him into a freefall that ended with him crashing hard into a pile of rubble on Earth's surface. For a moment, everything went black. When he opened his eyes again, he was surrounded by faces, human faces, staring down at him with expressions of awe and disbelief. Someone was shouting orders. Someone else was trying to patch up his wounds. But all Cain could focus on was the sky above him. The Hive ship was gone. What remained of it burned brightly as it fell from orbit in massive chunks that disintegrated upon re-entry. The DeathWorlders on Earth, those who hadn't already been killed, were scattering like insects without their queen. Their invasion was over. Humanity had won. Cain woke up days later in a hospital bed surrounded by people he didn't recognize, generals, politicians, scientists, all of them speaking words he barely processed. Hero, savior, legend. They told him how his actions had turned the tide of war, not just for Earth, but for every species in the galaxy that had ever feared extinction at DeathWorld hands. They told him how resistance cells across Earth had rallied after seeing what one man could do against impossible odds, and how those cells had driven back what remained of their invaders after Cain destroyed their hive mind. They told him he'd save humanity. He didn't care about medals or parades or speeches. Not really, but they gave them to him anyway. Every honor humanity had ever devised, and some newly invented just for him. His name spread across Earth and beyond. Other species whispered it with reverence and awe. Cain, the man who stood alone against annihilation and won. But when they asked him how he did it, how one man could accomplish what entire armies couldn't, he just shrugged. They bleed, he said simply. And that was enough for him.